Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on another Sedaru Live webinar. In addition to myself today, I've got one of my colleagues here, Matt Sellers. Matt is one of our senior services implementation Sedaru gurus, who's done a lot of work on this in this area here, pipe replacement, rehab, and CIP planning for folks. So we thought it'd be a good idea to have him in here as well too. Matt, how are you today?
Doing pretty good, Adam. Thanks.
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. So like I said, we're going to be today's webinar is going to be on integrated risk-based pipe rehab and replacement, and really focused around our Sedaru CIP tool and how you can use that to make your master planning, capital planning process for pipe replacement a little more interactive and hopefully a little more sustainable. As usual with these webinars, if this is your first time joining us, thank you. We're going to plan to keep the content here to about 30 minutes. I like to keep them about a half hour long here. I really want you guys to ask as many questions as possible, though. We want you to get a lot out of this. So you'll notice in that Zoom webinar interface that there's a button for Q&A. So if you hit on that button, you can post questions in there, and we'll answer those questions as we're going through the presentation. So don't be shy. Feel free to ask them, and we'll get them back to you. The more interactive this is, it tends to be better. If you don't already, look for us on social media. Look for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever your social media of choice is. And we post lots of good information in there as well. We've got webinars coming up next week around using Sedaru on public works, and then also leak and main break management, which are both really cool topics. So you'll see information about that, and then more webinars going into the future as well too. We always, I talk to folks a lot about drops, and drops is really our framework for how folks become a self-driving automated utility, right? And really thinking about how do you approach those in a stepwise piece. And with the understanding that when you want to do kind of revolutionary change within your utility, that you're going to be doing all those things one step at a time. And so we talk a lot about this idea of digital and real time, and a lot of our webinars have been focused around that. You're thinking about how do I get rid of paper-based processes? How am I using all this data together in real time, eliminating data silos, and then moving into making more sort of optimized decision making. And what we're going to talk about today is really more kind of focused on this kind of OPP side. We're not going to talk about work orders or how data gets into your system, or what those processes look like, but really more about what do I do with the process, right? How do I use all this data to make more predictive decisions, cut off problems at the pass, et cetera. So like I said, we're going to do that within our Sedaru CIP framework. One of the things I want you to keep in mind, though, as we're doing this, is to think about what your current master planning process looks like, right? And what's really common for a lot of folks is you're going through a process that maybe it's an annual process, maybe it's less than that, right? Maybe you're doing it every 5 years, and you're trying to come up with these CIP plans. And one of the things that has always been a rub for me in the industry is that you put a lot of work into a CIP program, you come up with a plan, you do maybe year one of that plan, and then things start changing. In the year 2 piece is less relevant, year 3 even less relevant, and by year 4 or 5, you're ready to just start over again, right? And you go through the whole kind of process again there, and that's a kind of costly way to really approach those things and less efficient. And then oftentimes the folks that are working on that CIP are really just your kind of your technical experts, as opposed to really being able to get a lot of other people involved, right? And Matt, I think you've seen some of that kind of in your work through the years in the industry, right?
Yes, definitely, yeah. Every 5 years or so, being able to update, or just things living on paper a lot. So having more of a dynamic kind of web-based interface you can share across people, I think really helps open up insight into all of that process. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm gonna show you guys here our Sedaru CIP tool. Matt's gonna chime in here as I probably overlook and miss some things in here. Like I said, he's done a lot more of this work hands-on than I have through the years. But I've been involved in quite a few projects with this and through the years. So the interface that you're looking at is pretty similar to a lot of the Sedaru interfaces that you might have seen. We're running this through a web browser. So this runs as an HTML5 application, so I can actually could be running it on on an iPad or any tablet really for that matter as well too. So I like the fact that it's really portable like that. So you're sitting in a meeting and you're discussing things. It's really nice to have a tool that you can kind of pull up on any device and discuss and talk about. So let me walk you through the process here a little bit. And one of the things when we talk about risk-based capital planning, what we're typically thinking about is likelihood of failure. Then we're thinking of consequence of failure, and then we're thinking about how we put those things together in a risk piece there. And that is, it's a pretty common methodology, but there's lots of details within that. So one of the things we do within Sedaru is we don't espouse a particular methodology within that, right? So Sedaru is not going to say, this is how you do likelihood of failure, or this is how you do consequence of failure. We give you a bunch of flexibility in how you approach that. So you'll start over here on the right-hand side where it says planning alternatives. So one of the powers of this is I can create as many different versions of what we call planning alternatives as I want. And there's a lot of power in that because I can go through lots of iterations within my capital planning piece and can really kind of play with the data to my heart's content. So I'm going to go in here to the performance tile piece here. And we're looking at this off of our, this is just a Sedaru demo site. There, folks that are interested in taking a deeper dive into CIP, we've got a lot of pretty neat examples that have been done by customers as well too. So the demo site's designed to kind of give you an idea of what you can do here a little bit. So you got some fairly kind of common criteria in here where I'm thinking about pipe age, pipe material. One of the big pieces I'm doing as I'm tying this into my GIS information is I'm able to get an overview on all my data and to kind of see what's what. So I'm looking here at pipe material. I've got, this is a count of pipe segments. I like to look at it by miles. So I go ahead and I switch that view there from counts to miles. So I've got 180 plus miles of AC pipe. I've got another almost 200 miles of cast iron pipe, and then I've got some plastic and ductile iron, et cetera, other pieces in my system as well too. I also could be looking at it here just based off pipe diameter. Same kind of idea. What do I have for 8-inch pipe versus 12-inch versus my larger transmission pieces? And this is a really nice piece just early on in projects like this where you want to identify, okay, what data do I have? Where do I have gaps, et cetera?
Yeah, what does it look like? You're going through the GIS and you're just trying to figure out, what's this acronym mean, or how does that look? And also, I'd like to add, we're looking at a water network on this, but this is totally compatible with sewer. Can sit on top of your NASCO database, that kind of thing too.
Absolutely.
So the criteria.
It's a great point. It's a great point because, like, if we were looking at a sewer system, we probably would want to include, that NASCO PACP information, so all your defect information. So instead of thinking as much about likelihood of failure on the sewer side, you're typically wanting to consider current condition and use that CCTV data. So here's a metric in here for leaks per mile. And so I've got information for that in here where I've got, you see I've got 3 miles of pipe that have, a relatively large number of leaks in here. I've got an even smaller number that, or even bigger than that, et cetera. So you can take all that break information and pull that into here as well too. And Matt, how would you handle like criteria that aren't beyond just these kind of simple 5 that we have here?
Yeah, we can basically pull in really any custom criteria as long as it's just like a part of the GIS attribute for a pipe layer or sewer main layer. It's just basically a certain type of integer, right? It's either like a text value number, et cetera. We're able to set that up and bring it in, so you can bring it as a custom criteria. And we can also bring in, your modeling data for a water modeling network. So you can see here pipe velocity. So, we can bring in others, and just depending on, what makes sense, sometimes maybe you want velocity or other, modeling results to be on like a consequence of failure instead of a likelihood of failure. There's different ways to evaluate the data from that perspective too.
Right. And what I did there while Matt was talking is I added this new criteria in, and then I went and I adjusted the weighting, right? So what you've got the ability to do is within each criteria is to have a score for what is the value of that criteria, right? So leaks per mile, 0 to 20 leaks got one score, 20 to 40 got another, 40 to 60 got another score. Same idea here with pipe velocity, same idea with pipe age. And then I add all those criteria together, and then I can adjust the relative weighting of those criteria in there as well too. So what's nice about that is you can define a methodology and a structure for here's how I want to rank things, right? And you can define that as your organization. And then as I do different planning alternatives, I've then got the ability to sort of weight things higher or lower and to really see what the effects of that are going to look like. Because oftentimes I'll see you really end up in a debate of, well, this is more important than this. And what about this? And now you've got the ability with this tool, you can run all those different scenarios and essentially see what is, and essentially see what the results are.
Yeah, as an engineer, that sensitivity analysis is very appreciated, from the engineering perspective, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and when you're doing your capital plans, I mean, there's a piece to this that I always remind people. There's only so many hours in the day that you can spend working on these things and coming up with alternatives, right? And your first alternative is going to be way worse than the 10th one that you come up with. You get smarter and smarter as you go through the process, right? So if I'm doing all this manually and I'm only able to come up with 1 or 2 alternatives versus coming up with 10 or 15 or 20 alternatives, you're going to get smarter and smarter. And so a tool like this lets you get into that faster.
So what's that isolation valves criteria? That's an interesting number, right? Because that's not something that naturally comes out of somebody's GIS per pipe, right?
Yeah. Do you want to explain that, Matt?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, this one specifically, we're able to take that water network and we can do it with sewer too with similar attributes. But what it's doing is it's doing like an outage analysis. It's figuring out which valves need to be operated, how many customers will be impacted if that's out of service. So kind of like a more of a pipe criticality perspective. These are things that get brought in naturally with that GIS water network database.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, and that's another good point. I mean, where this is everything with CIP is built off of Esri technology. We're an Esri business partner, and I'll kind of show you some of the map stuff in here. But we're able to actually take in that network and do a bunch of things with it to give you a little more intelligence than just looking at individual kind of pipe segments by themselves. And we'll hit on some of that in a minute here. And I'll just remind you guys, go ahead and kind of fire those questions into your Q&A piece here. One of the things when we're showing Sedaru CIP is, like I said, we're doing this webinar in about 30 minutes, but we could probably spend hours in here kind of getting into details on stuff. So if there's specific kind of things you want to know, fire away on some of those. You have the ability here also to look at customers affected as well too. So we're on the impact tile. So now we're thinking about, not so much what's the current condition of the pipe or when is it going to fail, how likely is it to fail. We're thinking about when it does fail, is it a big deal or is it not a big deal, right? And putting some grading and scoring to that. So there's a couple criteria set up in here for number of customers affected, isolation valves, and we have that piece. And so then really what I want to do is I'm going to now move over to my action plan. And so what the action plan is actually going to do is going to generate a list of assets for me, okay? And so it's essentially has applied a scoring to this here that is taking that likelihood of failure along with the consequence of failure and is coming up with a total risk score, okay? And there's and you can apply some different ways to this as well too. You can add weighting factors to the consequence of failure. I can look at, instead of multiplying, can add things together, can, do some different stuff. I can make things kind of vary non-linearly if I want.
Yeah, it's a lot of the project I've worked on with this tool, that's a really big feature because just everybody does their numbers a little bit differently. So being able to not worry about having to like change the math from the very beginning, like being able to just come in here and change what I want the endpoint to look like, or just adjusting these factors here. Like you can basically zero out. Let's say you just want to look at likelihood of failure. That's all you care about. Well, you could zero it out right here if you wanted to. You can do different things in this and not have to change everything from the beginning.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and what's neat is too is from a practical perspective, we've had a lot of utilities that will take a master plan that might have been recently done, right? So you worked with your consultant, you just did a master plan. They applied a methodology really similar to this, and one of the deliverables you're getting is like an Excel sheet that has all this stuff, or maybe you got GIS information, but you've already defined a bunch of these scoring pieces. Well, now you can set all of that scoring up right within here. So instead of your deliverable just being that binder with all the information in it, you've now got something that's living and breathing, but you're not reinventing the wheel from the methodology that you're employing in there. So you've got that flexibility to do that.
Yeah, and if you want to get into the details, right, you can
Yep.
click that export data button at the bottom. You can get the full spreadsheet of all your assets with their scores and associated attributes, all of that stuff. So, you can always take this and bring it into GIS or do whatever you want to with it outside of, this platform too.
Yep, absolutely. Good point. So so I'm here looking at the assets, and so now I can see, and these are individual pipe segments, right? So I click on one, and it's going to bring in, here's my score of 47.6, and gosh, where did that score come from? So I can click on that little graph icon, and it gives me the full breakdown, right? The pipe's about 50 years old. This is one of our leakier pipes in the system. The velocity didn't affect anything on here. We weren't worried about that in terms of fire flow or anything. But in here, in terms of consequence of failure, it's a relatively important pipe, right? It feeds, a lot of folks are tied to it. It's a high number of isolation valves. And so we end up with that. That's how you arrive at that score. And so now you've got this really kind of structured way to start thinking about all these pieces. And let me show you now what this looks like on the map, because this is really where you get to the power of some of this. And let me zoom out here. And so what you see when you come on the map now is a spatial representation of all those things we were just looking at in the table there, right? So I can come in, and that first pipe that was listed in here is right here. I can click on that, and I can see the exact same information we were just looking at right from here, right? And I can see these other pipes that are linked and related to it as well, and have all that information. So you've got that ability to kind of toggle back and forth between the map and the data there within it. And so that in and of itself, I think it's really, really powerful for folks.
Yeah, and to add here, like, this is showing those top 100 assets, and this is a big system. There's thousands and thousands of pipe. Another thing you can do in here is you can just drill in and click on really any pipe and see the risk scores for everything. So a lot of times we'll have clients, and you'll basically have areas that came to the top because maybe they had a leak, right? And that's, but maybe like right next door is still cast iron pipe that's really old that you probably need to replace as well. So just this ability to go through and see all the details, even though that doesn't have like an icon and it's colored, is really nice, I think, to be able to drill down and see, okay, should this also be a part of my project eventually, even though it's not my top 100 GIS asset? That there are certain methodologies that came into how this was developed. So
yeah,
it's good to be able to expose all that data.
Yeah, and I really like the idea too of when you can expose this to other people in the organization, and they can start asking questions of, well, hang on, well, why aren't we including this particular pipe? I selected one within here, because maybe somebody on your operation says, hey, this is a constant problem for me, but it's never getting into the CIP. And you can say, well, here's the methodology, here's the approach of why we're doing that, and maybe it's been a problem and that pipe has had leaks on it and all this, but it's not getting recorded properly in the field. And so it's showing up as being a non-leaky pipe. So it really kind of can help the whole organization understand the value of the data that's coming in and how that gets used. And I love the idea of when you can do engineering work and make it not a black box. right? So it just becomes really explainable to the organization, to your share, or to the board, to your stakeholders, all of those folks. So what's neat here too is I can switch from what we call assets to projects as well. So one of the problems that you're going to have with when you use GIS for, especially on a water system, it's a little easier on a sewer system, but on a water system, you're going to have lots and lots of small segments of pipe, right? And it's come in the nature of how GIS is created. So one of the immediate kind of issues is when you think about capital planning work, you're typically not going to replace a 50-foot section of pipe, right? You're going to replace larger sections of pipe. You're going to put larger projects together. And so CIP is built around that idea of I want to be able to create projects. And so if I go back to this criteria view, you're going to see, I don't know why it does that. Hang on a second. Let's see if I can get this to reload here.
Yeah.
That's all right. Let me
quick reload. But
what's that?
Yeah, just do a quick reload on that.
Yeah, sometimes that table gets funky. So what I'm going to see is I'm going to see the table is going to have a view that is going to show me, let's look here. It's going to have a project view as opposed to the asset view. And the projects view is actually taking all those different segments of pipe, and those segments of pipe, it's grouping them together. And you want to talk, Matt, a little bit about the methodology for how that grouping kind of works by default?
Yeah. I mean, it's using things like, proximity. If you have pipes that are similar in score and they're near each other, think that kind of thing. It's going to group those together. And even you can see some of these like have multiple different diameters. So it's really more based on a spatial and scoring basis. And you can edit those parameters, you can regenerate those projects. The idea behind that kind of functionality is just to create a good baseline, a good starting point, so the engineer, whoever's using it, can really focus on the priority areas to start creating those projects, because we realize we don't want it to be a black box. This needs to be a good engineering tool, and that engineering judgment still has to be applied here. So we want to provide a good baseline, good starting point, and then from there the engineer can start merging projects together, manually creating what they need on top of that baseline if they want to use that as a starting point.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and what's nice about this is I can look at this sort of overall view. We create this composite project score for things. So if I go to one here, let's see. If I go here to this second project, and then I look at the assets that were within it. So you see here, I've got 4 assets that are included in that particular project, right? I've got my 4th worst asset, my 9th, 10th, and 60th ranked assets in there that are all grouped together. And it creates this composite project score. And so that's really a normalized ranking of the projects of sort of what is the riskiest piece in there. So there's, again, you can still kind of make apples to apples comparisons on things. But then what I like about this is you still can, from a manual perspective, can kind of rank and manage things, So I could come into this project that's sort of my project that's the 3rd one I want to do, and I can move it up, right? And I can bring that up now to the top of my list, right? So I've got this really just easy, intuitive way to kind of reshuffle, remanage projects and kind of keep a really nice priority list together. If I go back to the map, we can look at all of these things spatially in here as well too. Oops, I'm sorry, I meant to go back to the map. We'll go back here, and I'm going to see on the map where all these individual projects are. And so I've got the ability here to also start kind of overriding some of my project parameters that we're doing that we're creating the automatic kind of merging of things. So I could come in and say, I choose this project number 88 in here, but I just want to go ahead and merge it with these other ones. So I'm going to hold down the control key. I'm going to take those 3 projects and go down here and say merge selected. And it gives me a little warning, says, hey, you sure you want to do it? But we're going to do that. And so now that's going to merge that and update our project list in here. And So you've got this ability to kind of, keep reshuffling things yourself in there. You see here's this project that we created. And what's nice here is it's also managing the updated project cost in here. And I can come in and look at all the details of that. And you can set up all the costing in here. But it's designed to give you good cost estimates. It's not designed to give you, RFP design, hard numbers, but to be able to let you relatively rank all these projects together.
That's right. And you can override the cost if you had a more finalized number in place. You can override it. And then the costs, they're managed per scenario. So let's say you have a city. Let's say if you build inside your more urban area, those projects cost higher. So maybe you create a planning alternative for just that area, and then maybe the more rural areas where the projects are definitely going to be not as expensive. You can change your project parameters here and have a different setup for that too. So
yep, absolutely. Let's hit one of the questions we have out here, Matt. The question is how would you, maybe you can just talk to this for the moment, like how would you score CCTV data in here if we're talking about sewer systems? What's the approach there look like?
Yeah, a lot of that data is still just essentially an integer or number or score. So it's treated kind of the same way a lot of these other criterias are. As you bring it in as one of those criterias and assign scoring, most likely 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for certain ranges of those scores. And essentially include that in your LOF, most likely your LOF category there.
Right. So I could take my operational score out of the PAPC database, my structural rating that comes out of there. I could use a quick rating. I could
number of defects or certain types of defects.
Yeah. All those sort of features. And you also could pull in criteria like D/D ratios, right, or flow kind of capacities as well, and use those pieces in there too, right? So I might have pipe that's in good condition, but is constantly surcharged and flowing, and again, that's where that idea of how do I want to use my weighting factors to relatively, to kind of rank some of those pieces in there. So
yeah, exactly.
So that's a good question. We're getting up, towards towards 30 minutes here, so we are going to want to wrap this up soon. So if there's other questions that folks have, feel free to fire those questions in there, and we'll get those addressed in here as well too. Matt, what other things do you think do you want to show people in here?
One of the things I always find really useful is the ability to do a save as, right? So once you finally you've kind of settled on your methodology, your criteria, that's pretty fixed. And maybe what you're trying to do is, filter out specific assets or change a couple of minor things. So being able to, either save the plan, like these two options like you're showing here, you can save the plan plus the projects so that all the criteria scoring will be kept in place, or you just want to start anew, right? And just keep the criteria parameters that you're set up, but your projects list will be blank or auto-generated again. So these two options are great, and you don't have to go through that whole process again of establishing the weighting and the scoring, or make a little click error or something like that with these setups.
Right.
So.
And when you create planning alternatives now too, you can also apply filters right from the start of that, right? So that if I want to just immediately off the bat only consider a subset of my pipe and my system, I can do that, right? And say, hey,
yeah, we'll be rolling out that soon. Yeah, basically
8 inches that are higher, or
you have a specific pressure zone you care about, or district, or really any attribute that you add to your mains layer, it can consume that. And it's a simple query like is or is not, and then you pick the options you want, and then you basically are able to create projects and score assets within that specific area.
Yep, absolutely. So here's a question, Matt. So is the idea that there's redundancy, and I'm assuming this means like hydraulic redundancy, is that built into, are you able to account for that in this sort of LOF, COF risk approach?
Yeah, again, the fact that you can bring in any criteria, that could be something that is developed by a utility or a consultant, or we'd be able to perform those services too. But essentially, that's something that can be brought in if you have that information, like what's the % demand shortfall if this pipe goes out of service or other things. Again, it's just we consider that most likely a custom criteria we'd bring in that needs to be populated.
Yeah. So depending on how you would want to account for that redundancy and what the piece is there, because sometimes it's straightforward, sometimes it's not so straightforward.
Right.
In there, I mean, one of the best things you can look at and do, and you have this ability within CIP, like on the water side, is I can automatically analyze the number of customers affected by an outage of that pipe, right? And so if I have sections of my system that are critical, right, that have low redundancy, they're going to have really high numbers of customers affected by losing service on that particular pipe, versus in a well-looped kind of distribution system where if I lose that pipe, I'm really just affecting the people tied into it, right? So, but again, and also as Matt was talking about, considering valving into that as well too, you can kind of really get a pretty accurate piece in there. So there's a question in here around like rehab, like how can risk scores be updated? So essentially what you can do is that, as Matt was kind of talking about, you can save out your criteria, right? So you can define all that methodology, and then essentially your CIP can be rerun with updated sets of information in it, right? So again, and some of that boils down to, from an architecture side, how you're updating things as work is completed and things have been rehabbed and some of that. But this is designed to allow you to define the criteria and then apply it to various sets of data as you're going forward.
Yeah, and a part of it is just like about good data governance too, right? So like, for example, leaks is a classic example where you're going to be prioritizing those pipes that break a lot. So that's great when you replace that pipe, but whoever's managing that leak database, needs to go in and clean that out a little bit. You don't want to have all these historical leaks that now get assigned to a new pipe or something like that. So there's certain things that need to happen too, just as far as data quality goes, to make sure that's respected. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. There's a question here around bulk importing of risk scores for assets. So, I mean, it's not designed to really bulk import a final risk score per se, but you can certainly bulk import all criteria that make up that risk score, right? Because what we're trying to do is to have a tool that you can kind of live and breathe with you and allow you to adjust that risk over time.
Yeah, and you could bring in a specific score, but then again, it doesn't tell you a whole lot behind it, right? So
and there's a kind of a question here that is a good question in terms of where does this Sedaru CIP tool, where does it differentiate itself from some of the other pieces that are out there, right? Because there is certainly a variety of different software tools focused on this, right? And so there's a couple key things here. I think one, Sedaru is designed as a tool that's going to, a big picture, allow you to bring in data and work with stuff from all over the place. So we're not just looking at, hey, what's the likelihood of failure of pipes breaking, right? And then letting that kind of drive everything. It's really designed to more holistically approach things. If you have that kind of data, you could bring it in, right? So if I've gone out and I've contracted with some other service that's given me condition or likelihood of failure data, and I have all that information, then you bring it in, right? And you use it as part of it. Our biggest, I think, differentiator is it's designed to be a tool that the utility is going to be able to use year after year after year, right? And so whether you're a consultant working with the utility, whether you're a utility staffer, you can all collaboratively work together in the same environment to carry out your projects there. And then we had another question here, and we're going to get wrapped up here in a minute, around, do we have pre-built integrations to CityWorks and Maximo? So Sedaru does integrate to both CityWorks and Maximo. You can use Sedaru as a standalone work order asset management system, or it can integrate to some existing systems that are out there. So there's certainly some details in that, and and what your approach is and how some of the data is stored and all those pieces. But integrating to CityWorks and Maximo data to get that information incorporated into this is certainly really doable. All right, well, good. I think we're running out of time here. Lots of really good questions. Did I get everything, Matt? Oh, is there
There's
so
some
one
questions that
question
came
here
in through
around?
the chat window,
Oh, okay.
as opposed
Yeah, and I
to.
see a question here around baseline scores. So, is there a baseline of scores or acceptable methodology of score ranking? I mean, so one of the things when you get Sedaru CIP, we will provide implementation services to do a basic setup for folks, right? So for some folks, that is really basic. They already have methodology, they have all the ways they want to approach this, and they're just really getting data loaded into this and they're getting off and running. Other folks want more advice and help with stuff. And like I said, there's a whole universe of engineering consultants that can help with that. And then we've got staff like Matt and other folks that can provide some guidance there as well too. So, and really, it's however you want to make that work. So it's pretty flexible from our end. And I haven't looked at that chat, so let me see here. Yeah, so let me hit a couple of these questions here then. So in terms of, the question of how do you manage with changing budget scenarios, right? And really relevant question right now, right? Because I think of how many utilities have had CIP plans put together, and then, in a sort of COVID-19 adjusted world, folks have slashed some capital budgets, right? So what's your suggestion there, Matt? How do you handle a changing capital budget parameter in terms of getting projects done?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is embedded here with this project parameters options. You can go in there and you can change, what's your max cost per project, how many projects you want to see here. Just as there's the auto generation tool, so you can manually tweak it. But I mean, as you can see, we're always summing up the total amount of what our actual projects are. So as you can totally customize and tweak and remove this project list, it's really up to the user to say, okay, like, this is my project plan and this is the budget I'm sticking under maybe for this 2020 year or whatever. And that's how you would essentially manage that as you go through it and prioritize.
Right. So I might have had a universe, just to throw a number, I might have had a universe of $1 million worth of projects made up of, 30 different pipe projects in here. And now my budget is $700,000. I can essentially go in and I could use the composite scoring, which is going to give me, what the highest risk is, which should kind of be, bang for your buck a little bit. But I also can manually sort of re-rank and easily adjust on those pieces in there as well too. Or like Matt said, kind of use some of the automated tools to readjust what's a project and some of those pieces in there. All right, well, good. Well, good. Thanks, everybody, for all the great questions today. Thanks for your time today. Everybody that attended today, you're going to get a follow-up email. So feel free to ask more questions that come in that email. You might get a follow-up phone call. Have a conversation with us, engage with us, and we're happy to kind of explore and talk to you about all these different things and all the different ways that the Sedaru CIP tool could be used. And I think, again, sort of especially relevant to thinking about folks that are on the fly right now adjusting capital budgets. Using a tool like this can make it really straightforward to do that. So good. Thanks, Matt, for helping out and sharing all your expertise with us. I think it was great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.